All right, guys, welcome back to another PAWCast. In the last couple of segments, we've gone through our diagrams for defining accountability and assigning accountability. But now we're starting to wrap all of those concepts together into the next diagram, which is creating accountability. So you're going to see it's going to be a multi-part segment where there's no way we're going to be able to cover everything all at once. But the idea is you're going to start to see how all of these concepts between establishing a purpose to which ours is, of course, serve the patient, but getting into core values, the integration of core values into accountability, both on defining and assigning. But this next multi-part series is going to be on the creating accountability diagram. So stay tuned.
Welcome to the PAWCast.
All right. So last week talked a whole lot about this concept of accountability, put a whole lot of definition on it, as well as, what are some of the roles that end up being played when we are either not accountable or being accountable to the actions that we decide to take. And now the last part is about taking specific actions to create these accountable conversations, allowing people to then own the problems that they're a part of, create solutions, and then implement those solutions.
Single-handedly, the most difficult part of all of it.
Wait, you don't like having uncomfortable conversations with people about how they screwed up?
Yeah, right.
Because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. What did one of our employees, Trevor, he said, he says, we don't use the word fault anymore. We use the word accountable.
Yes. Yes.
Which,
yes.
It's kind of what it is. But it's sort of not. Because really, when we start to talk about the culture of the clinic, it's kind of off of one of the books you referenced, the Culture Code.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really what we're talking about is an environment where you're allowed to make mistakes, which aren't going to be met with a reprimand.
Right.
You can do a better job talking to me about the Culture Code as it sort of integrates into accountability.
So the big part about that is that idea of a safe environment, which again,
it's not a safe space,
right? Because just making sure that we make the distinction, because culturally a safe space is somewhere that basically you can't offend anybody, whatever that might be. Right. College, it's kind of lived in colleges, all that jazz. Yep. This is a very different thing where you are safe to essentially create something where you have a likelihood of failure. So when that likelihood is met, where you do actually in fact fail, the safety comes from the other individuals that realize and then correct the failure. Yeah. So basically, the best example that I always remember from the book is talking about when Steve Jobs ran Pixar. Yep. That Toy Story, the first write of Toy Story, was not up to standard.
Sure.
They brought it to the cutting room floor and they cut the hell out of it. Yeah. However, they also had a copious amount of notes to make it better. Yeah. And the people that wrote it were not in any way devalued. It was just the process of improvement. Yep. And then there was an appreciation on both sides to say, this project can be good. This is what it needs to be good. Now go out and do it. Yep. What they did was they basically had the accountable conversation of, here's your solutions, go implement them. Now, if those people would have sat around and not done anything or made excuses, blamed, whatever that sort of stuff is, they're out. Yeah. They're out of the company. But they didn't. They made Toy Story. Now we're to Toy Story 4, one of the biggest animated franchises ever. Yeah. And it will be hard to beat. So the idea was that they were safe to bring that to the floor so long as they were willing to take the criticism that they were going to get and then be able to, and maybe not even implement the solutions. Maybe they'd move on to another project. Yeah. Whatever it might be, they just have to be able to, in a non-safe environment, they wouldn't bring it to the floor at all. Yep. That's the difference. Yep. Yep. So to go along with safety, again, with more in accordance with the book, we have vulnerability. So those two things play off of each other. So Steve Jobs and his team in that example created the safe environment. to allow the people to be vulnerable with the project. And everybody can do, I mean, you can do that on a one-to-one basis, just with like friend, whatever it might be, all the way up to that level. It's just it's the culture in which you want to create, whether you're making yourself vulnerable, putting yourself out there, or allowing other people to do so. That's what these accountable conversations are. They're not the common understanding that like of performance reviews where you might get fired or whatever it might be. It's more about what we call performance growth, not reprimand. And I think that's where, as we start to pull all of these different pieces together, you're right, between that sort of, safety and vulnerability, and we start to talk about then how we're merging the idea of core values, and of course we have the 4 core values: trust, respect, unity, accountability, but we sort of merge that into one common purpose or one common goal. And it's like you said with Toy Story, it's a perfect example. We have this common goal to create, the best animated, film of the time. That's the common purpose. For us, our common purpose is to serve the patient. And that's kind of when you look at building safety and then sort of sharing that vulnerability. It's once you have that established common purpose and those pieces work together, this whole system starts to unify. And even for us, I don't know if you guys obviously can't see the table here, but I always have these papers out. I got my laptop open, I got these open, just so I can start to see and make sure my brain is making all the appropriate connections on all these different parts. But yes, that's the idea. You have this common purpose, you have your core values, and then we start to look at this high level of accountability. Is if in your work environment you have this low level of accountability, you're never really going to be able to sort of build safety and share vulnerability. Is because it's always like, oh, I can't bring, oh, they're going to yell, oh, it's going to be, oh, I'm going to get this, oh, is it, and what we then start to play more into is then the victim role. So instead of having sort of in this, cutting room floor on a film, it's like, instead of having a bunch of victims on, oh my God, we wrote this story, we thought it was fantastic, and the bosses thought it was trash, while the bosses being the persecutors, it's no, so now the bosses become the challengers. And it's like, no, we're going to hack this up because we're going to make it better. You guys just need to be willing to create sort of what this thing is. And it's kind of aptly named, of course, challenger, creator, and coach. But then what does that process look like? And I think that's then when you sort of come into then the sort of creating accountability diagram. This creating accountability diagram is what works for us in this industry. Now, again, some clinics may sort of tweak in some capacity, or it may not be applicable in every setting. But the idea is the process of a film cutting room floor is creating accountability.
It's creating accountability. It's just a different process for that industry. Same thing goes for video game industry, between video game development, all those different types of things, which Nintendo has been around for as long as it's been around, which sidetrack that one. I do have a pair of Hanafuda cards. I don't know if I ever told you that. It's fantastic. It's a Mario themed Hanafuda card. It's fantastic. Anyway, if anyone doesn't know what Hanafuda is, they're flower cards. You can look it up online. It's Koi Koi is a fantastic game. Anyway, moving on. Sorry, sidetracked. Way out there. But again, the process by which you create accountability and you make your process stronger, you make your business stronger, is I had a conversation with one of my colleagues earlier today, and one of the things that we had talked about in trying to sort of build a practice, you're trying to improve a clinic, right? And we said, when we got done in our podcast where we talked about the 3 main problems, we said, what's the next one we should go into? The next one we should talk about is core values, because that's the most important. What sort of owners do on the back end, well, of course, we are trying to focus on culture. On the back end, we're trying to fix the business, right? So how's our inventory managed? What's our pricing at? Pay, scale, all those types of things. That's really like the hard and fast thing. So you try to implement a new paperless clinic, right? Or you try to institute a new software. You try to institute more blood machines. That's very mechanical. And that's the pill hardest to swallow, where it's like, oh my God, I have to learn a new computer. Oh, we're going paperless. Oh, what's this new blood machine? Oh, I tried to switch to this. So what I made the joke is that those very mechanical things are tough, right? How we're going to manage inventory now, right? So it's like everyone's going to be accountable to inventory. Those are the tough to swallow pills. But culture is the tasty pill pocket. it's the hot dog, you know, it's it's the marshmallow, right?
Yeah.
It's the piece of cheese, it's sort of the bait in saying that if we can start to fix culture, and we're saying, okay, now, and this is then now we've been talking about culture in the core value section as far as, hey, let's all get together and have a good team. But when we start to talk about how all of our problems in the profession are melding into one another and they all have overlap with one another, and we're saying, well, now we have this other pill we need the staff to swallow. Like one of the things that we did with Covetrus was have our online prescription management platform. So now we have the ability to send out prescription and compounding. It's this fantastic platform with Covetrus. To then institute that to the staff, hey, there's this one other thing that we sort of need you guys to do. And they're like, oh my God, another thing. And it's like, but we're going to institute it because our ability to serve the patient improves.
Right.
And it comes back to what our core value is. It's our purpose, our common purpose is to serve the patient. It's like, oh, we have the ability to send heartworm, flea, and tick preventative monthly, so they don't have to buy 12 at one time, and it gets shipped to them at no charge, and we can increase compliance and make sure that the patient gets all of the stuff they need. It also has all of our prescription foods and compounded meds, and they're like, oh, well, that's fantastic then.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
it is, because we have an accountable group and we have this sort of safety and this vulnerability. So a part of it is it's coming in as a business owner to say, I have this new thing I want to do. It's not met with, well, the clients are never going to like that.
Right.
It's coming in, it's like, oh, well, that means our prices are going to go up. Well, yeah, it might go up a bit, whatever this process happens to be. But in doing so, we're going to be able to have this benefit, this benefit, this benefit, this benefit. And that's, I think, when we start to talk about why it's so important to create accountability.
Yeah, because what you just described was a team that has accountability in its head, was already on board with the fact that you like basically you saw the problem.
Yep.
You owned the problem.
Yep.
You now have said, here's solution.
Yep.
Team, I need you to help me implement it.
Yes.
All I need you is for step number 8.
Yep.
So if you have an unaccountable team,
Yes.
you have to go all the way up.
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
process
You
to
gotta pull people
maintain
up
on
from
the
the
top.
bottom. Yeah.
That's what's difficult. That's what's
Yeah.
so exhausting. That's what that's one of the things that I'm a big believer in is that motivation is fleeting, but process is continuous. And that's what you're saying is like we've just created these processes to make sure that this stays up because we're not always going to be motivated to bring in the new solution.
Motivated, yeah.
But we understand because of the process
Yeah.
why it's there. And even though like we just saw 100 patients in 2 days and we're all just depleted, we still got to do it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, which is close, right? Yeah.
It was about 100.
Yeah, it was about 100.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which is pure insanity.
I mean, you're talking 20 square feet
Yeah.
per patient.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The new building. Right. Yeah.
No, in
the
this
current
one,
building,
this one, that's not a whole lot of space.
No.
So-
Just moving staff around. So yeah, like I said, so again, that's kind of how this creating accountability comes into it. Is it's
Yes.
merging all of these concepts and all of the different examples, and that's why this is gonna have to be a multi-part series.
Yeah.
Is because we're gonna hopefully generate a ton of ideas, a ton of things to kind of drive this home, and in those kind of multi-part, I feel like there's gonna be a lot of bleed over in them because it is all sort of the same topics. Because now I feel like I really hope if people have stuck with us from the beginning. Is seeing us kind of walk you through to get up to these kind of solutions part and how much of them kind of do work together in that regard, which is actually pretty nice. So if you guys look at again, this is the Creating Accountability PDF, which is available on the website at pawhealth.net/PAWCast, or just go to pawhealth.net and you can follow the links. There's kind of several different parts when you look at this creating accountability, and we kind of have two main roles in our organization chart or org chart. And those two main roles, one is the chief clinical officer, and the other one is the senior accountability officer. And it is kind of a side-by-side position because we have different roles. The senior accountability officer does not necessarily need to be a veterinarian. It is helpful when the chief clinical officer is, just because there's kind of more like medical intensive parts of that.
Yeah.
But when you start to look at sort of what the senior accountability officer is, we don't have an HR manager.
Right.
We don't have an office manager, which is probably bizarre to some people. No office manager, no HR, none of that kind of stuff. Is what we have is someone who's solely dedicated to accountability. And that's when we started to look at our organization chart and how we wanted to sort of structure our business, but more importantly, sort of structure the future of our profession. The position of an office manager does not make sense. When you have one person in charge of so many different operations, and I think your traditional sense of a office manager, this person may be in charge of bookkeeping. They might be in charge of inventory. They might be in charge of performance reviews. They might be in charge of hiring and firing. They might be in charge of all these different things. And it's like, that is too much weight for one person to assume that it's going to be done well.
Yeah.
And that's when, kind of as an organization, what we did was then say all of these different jobs. I think we had 3 pages that an office manager was responsible for. And we basically started to say, okay, the first half of one page is a job, the second half of this first page is a job. So we started to kind of team these out. But what kind of surfaced to the top is this senior accountability officer. And this person, who in our organization is Annie, sort of has a really higher sort of understanding of all of these processes, because it bleeds through from how people are recruited, how they're hired, to their individual performance, the day-to-day accountability, to then, our performance review system, which we'll talk about how our performance growth system and performance review system is at a later time. That's not necessarily part of this. But it really is sort of the workhorse of accountability. And it's not a matter of having HR or an office manager, is that all of these things between core values and accountability, creating and assigning, you need someone just focused on culture the entire time. And I think for a lot of your traditional business owners, they may not see the value in paying that position.
Yeah.
But for us, it's saying, no, we sort of have this sort of, empowered individual that is focusing single-handedly on the most important part of any practice, which is culture. You have to invest in that. And I think coining the term, or at least picking up the term senior accountability officer, takes it out of that stigma of HR. And putting us more into saying, no, it's not just, you're going to call human resources for this. No, we're actually talking about our accountability to the patient, or serving the patient, the core values. And that's then, it
so
works.
those two roles, basically, the clinical officer is kind of like your medical accountability officer, but it's more limited because thankfully we have very competent staff. For the most part, we don't experience major medical issues often enough where that's a full-time job. But again, the reason that role exists is, again, actually when you talk about breaking apart those roles, that's for the sake of scalability. So when you talk about this generic office manager that has a 3-page job description, that person with that long of a job description is your biggest barrier to growth, because there's only so much they can do, and they're going to be your pinch point with in terms of growth. So the clinical officer, at some point, hopefully, that's somebody's full-time job, where you have so much of a work, it becomes a full-time thing.
Segue
not that we
in
care
there
to make that many mistakes, but
my first employer had one office manager for 4 practices, which attempted scalability on that one role
and just crushed that person.
Correct. Yes, a significant amount of hardship. So I think, and even in that, and then like you said, crushing that individual, that's just a lot of responsibility for any one person to just never be able to disconnect from work. So if we have these super long job descriptions, and it's like, I got to call on this, and I got to call for that, and I got to call for this and call for this, it's like, no. You work when you are here, and if you're doing work at home, then you need to work less at work so you can then work outside of work, to not have these unpaid hours, right? So if you're, it's kind of like, the spot that teachers are in, where it's like they're grading papers at home. It's like you should have a compensation structure that allows you to do it in class, but that doesn't exist, and I'm not going to go there. But anyway, it's the same idea, and that's a lot of weight for that one person.
So these 2 roles, though, as it relates to our process, basically we've got our 3 parts in the middle, 2 of which are processes, and 1 is kind of what the processes are built upon. In being the case review and the after action review. If, again, kind of starting with where the culture code stuff leaves off. Well, actually, they go directly into it. The after action review was introduced to me from that book, which then I just went to the source, which was the Marines. Which for many people are just like checked out, because it's like, that's probably pretty brutal, because we're, as everyone is aware, they don't really pull punches in the Marines. We've made the joke that vet school is like boot camp, except they forget to lift you back up when you're done. But regardless, the after action review is essentially the team debrief regarding a situation. And then the case review is the individual's debrief regarding a specific specific situation. So in our context, the chief clinical officer tends to run case reviews because they tend to be with doctors. And then our senior accountability officer tends to run after action reviews because they tend to be more team-based, more cultural-based, communication issues, all that sort of stuff.
Yep. And that's why we have that diagram oriented the way that we do.
Right.
Is that your chief clinical officer and your senior accountability officer are both touching case reviews because they do have some input, whereas a chief clinical officer really shouldn't have much to do with an after action review because that is more of that team dynamic. And I think one of the ways that when we originally started to talk about the difference between those two things is when there is a problem. So we call it a case review. In a lot of cases, it's a medical case review, but sometimes it could be a matter of the wrong medication was administered, right? And that would have been more on the medical support staff, or the wrong calculation was provided. That'd be more on the veterinarian side. So people understand kind of the difference between a case review and an after action review, is it jumps back to our accountability ladder, which is the defining accountability chart, as far as saying, if you approach an individual with a problem and you say, hey, this patient was provided the wrong dose of blank. And if they're in the higher parts of that accountability ladder, we're like, you know what? Yep, I'm willing to own this, and saying, yep, that was me. I did give the wrong medication. Or if they immediately jump over to saying, no, it wasn't me, actually. I didn't pull that drug. Or, when they shouted this to me across the room, it wasn't written down. So when you fall into that lower level of the accountability ladder and it's excuses and blame, as soon as it comes into saying, nope, it was someone else, after action review.
Right.
So now it's the team coming together and saying, well, we're under the impression that we identified you as being the person who was responsible for this particular mistake. The only reason why we're bringing it up is because, well, we want to make sure the mistake doesn't happen again, but how can we support you in the team? How can we create this environment where, like we were talking about, safety and vulnerability, right? So it's not a reprimand. It's just more of like, we need to get better with this so we can all collectively serve the patient. And if that person isn't willing to live in the reality and willing to own it, then the team is going to,
right?
And it's going to be, okay, then what we're going to do is talk to the 5 people that were on shift that day, and we're going to collectively identify the reality of this situation so the individuals can own it appropriately.
Right. And a lot of times what happens in that process is we've got that side where there's the blame, but there's also the indecision or just lack of knowledge.
Sure.
So definitely when the finger gets pointed, the stop sign goes up.
Yeah.
And then from that point, we jump in because if you want to, we've got our actual stop sign. Right. But so we've got that as an element. And I just lost my train of thought.
I know. I did that. So that was
stop sign.
No, it's when they start pointing the finger, stop sign goes up.
So because the idea is, all right, you want to point the finger? We'll do it in a group. You can point right at them.
Yes.
We're going to have the conversation.
Yes. Yep.
And it's not because I want you two to actually fight, but it's because there's some level of missing information or some communication you guys didn't have. And I'm not going to have this conflict sit around and allow you two to not like each other.
Yes.
We're going to just cut it off at the knees, and it's going to be done.
Yeah. Yep.
And then, so that's where we get into the next side is maybe that person was like, I'm not really sure. I don't remember making that mistake.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed something. Like, that means we need to call in some reinforcements or what it might be. And again, the team comes together, but both sides of that is for growth. It's for advancing individuals and the company as well. It's not about everyone agreeing that this person was the problem.
No.
And now we can, hold this over their head. And that brings us into the last point as we kind of wrap up this short one so that we can introduce these ideas is this whole thing is built on the concept of forgiveness being, you make a mistake, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's fine. Like we have created a safe environment saying, I'm going to allow you to make mistakes. I'm going to forgive those mistakes too, and we're going to let those go so long as you continue to be here to serve the same purpose that we're here for. If we serve different purposes, we're going to have it's going to be much more difficult to get to that point. Thankfully, we don't really have much of that issue. Yeah. And honestly, that issue, so long as you all, it's a shared purpose that is verbalized in some way. Yeah. We're veterinarians, we're medical support, we're in the veterinary industry. Most of us know what the purpose is. Yeah. So we have that. And then with this forgiveness model, it's basically saying, okay, I'm going to forgive you and we're going to reset our terms of accountability. Yep. And what that is, it just says, if you want to blame somebody for the problem, if you want to make an excuse for the problem, if you want to deny that there's a problem, you want to whatever was 1 through 4, I'm just going to absolve you of it.
Yep.
So long as you're ready to come up
into reality,
reality, start to own it.
Yep.
And then move forward.
Yep.
Now, again, if you're just here to serve yourself, you just want to make excuses, you just want to edify whatever
your own
ego you might
process,
have.
right?
I don't.
You're such a hard worker, right? You know,
Yes,
right?
yes.
That's a common coin term where people are such hard workers for themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as long as there's that shared that mutual understanding that you're going to move into the accountable side of things, the forgiveness is super easy.
Yeah.
It's like, I will
absolutely.
let that go because you know what? Like, I mean, how many times have we had the conversation like, thanks for making the mistake actually? Because we just realized that we have to fix this problem.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you did it intentionally most of the time. It's probably an error in process somewhere.
Yeah.
Now we can get better. Now this problem can never happen again. Now Ben can go rewrite 3 pages of the caregiver support guide because we got scammed. Right. Whatever it might be.
Yes.
But without the forgiveness piece, without the letting go of the resentment and all that sort of stuff, it's so hard to maintain a safe environment. So you have to be willing. And the big key of this thing, and we're going to dive further into it later, is that the forgiver is making the sacrifice. It's not the individual that's owning the problem that's making the sacrifice. It's you as the forgiver saying, I'm choosing to not be mad, to not want to exact vengeance on somebody or whatever it might be. It's nope. I'm going to sacrifice those feelings so you and I can both move ahead together.
Yeah. No, and honestly, it sounds tough. It sounds tough. And the thing is that the creating accountability page, these are sort of your tools. So the case review is a tool for identifying opportunities for growth within the individual. The after action report is a tool for communication to facilitate conflict resolution. That's the tool. The forgiveness model is the method. So,
exactly.
The tool identifies it. The forgiveness model is the method. But honestly, when I start to even the examples that you gave about this and say, the person who is forgiving has to be the sacrificer. Honestly, when you are the one who is forgiving an individual and you as the forgiver have a high level of accountability, it's fucking easy.
It's not hard at all.
No, it's like, you made a mistake. Oh, you lived in reality and owned it. Yeah, perfect. Okay, let's just move forward. Yep. No, of course I forgive you. I mean, that was a mistake. Yeah, whatever.
When it's so funny too, because like the startup for many people can be difficult.
It's tough.
The startup is the hardest part.
Yeah.
But once you get to that point, like you don't even have to have the conversation anymore. Is because it's as soon as you develop the communication path.
Absolutely.
It's when you as the forgiver automatically jump to its solution. Everybody knows you've already gotten to the point of forgiveness.
Absolutely. Oh, exactly.
So long as you set the pattern on the onset, you have to be deliberate about it. That's what these tools are here for, to be extremely deliberate about those things. But once you set that talk path, once you start to understand how these things work together, and then you can skip some steps along the way, everyone's talking already on the same page.
Between and then your safety and vulnerability is there. Because if you as the forgiver to extend forgiveness to someone, it's a super easy process for you to forgive. And I think the big thing when we were kind of sold on the forgiveness model in the beginning, it doesn't mean there isn't accountability.
Right.
It doesn't mean like, oh, I forgave you for doing this thing and you can do this one thing 17 times. That's not how this works. The part is that when these mistakes are made, it's identifying, like we said, it's sort of identifying that opportunity for growth. That's the whole point. It's not a reprimand system. It's a growth system. And I think, again, for us, this was just meant to be a short little thing. And I think it's probably a good starting point because we're really going to start to dive into these next. But again, just, so you guys could kind of look at the creating accountability sort of diagram. It's between the chief clinical officer, the senior accountability officer. It's a matter of sort of individual and team related, type building activities and culturally, of course, coming up into that safety and vulnerability basically through the forgiveness model. Yeah,
absolutely. So I mean, if that's not enough hype for you all want to listen to the next 3 episodes, I don't know what is.
At least 3. I don't even know. This might span hours. So we may even just piggyback it right after this one. But
we'll pick this one up next week. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. We'll see y'all later.
All right, stay tuned.